Okay, at this point, people say to me, okay, we hear you, but what's going to happen come next year? What sorts of legislation is going to get enacted? What can we count on, and what difference does it make depending on who's elected? And my answer is, in fact, the most important decisions are going to be made before all these new people take office. In the tumultuous election campaign that's coming forward, we can't expect Congress to pass any legislation this year before Election Day. At this point, you might as well save electricity and turn out the lights on Capitol Hill, because nothing is going to happen before November 6th in Washington. That means that Congress has to come back after Election Day for a 3-week session between Thanksgiving and Christmas, a session that I call the mother of all lame duck sessions. This is going to be extraordinary, because in those 3 weeks, Congress has to deal or decide not to deal with a number of provisions that are about to either expire or go into effect. It starts with all those spending cuts that were agreed to last year, including the $1 trillion of defense cuts. Those go into effect starting next year unless Congress passes something to stop that. Congress has to pass a budget to run the government next year, or the federal government will shut down. We may have to deal with the debt ceiling again. Remember, that was the whole mess last August where we almost defaulted on all of our debt? Well, it got raised enough to get us through the election, but it's quite unclear it got raised enough to get us through the end of the year. And then most important, the Bush tax cuts, the lower tax rates we've all been enjoying, are slated to expire at the end of 2012. That's why the White House Chief of Staff says we have a perfect storm set up for December 2012. Last year, when everybody was arguing over the deficit, the president wanted Congress to adopt a balanced plan to reduce the deficit, by which he meant lower spending and raise taxes. The Republicans, of course, said no to that. But the president has a card in his back pocket. He says the Bush tax cuts expire as of 1/1/2013, the same date the spending cuts go into effect. Absent a balanced deal, it enables the president to use his veto pen to ensure $1 trillion in deficit reduction by not extending the high-income tax cuts. Now, by high-income tax cuts, the president means the cuts for families with income over $250,000 a year. Now, many of your clients, I realize, don't think $250,000 is wealthy. They believe it's broke, but with better stuff. Having said that, the president's view is to raise taxes on those families. And he's right about one thing. President Obama will be president on December 31st, 2012, when the Bush cuts expire, regardless of the outcome of the upcoming presidential election. But he's wrong about something else. He can't simply veto the extension of the tax cuts for the affluent. If the Bush tax cuts aren't extended, next year taxes go up across the board on all Americans. So let's do a little role playing here. Let's say it's now December. Congress is forced to come back to Washington after a tumultuous presidential and congressional campaign. And let me tell you, by this time, they can't stand each other. We're going to stuff them into 2 rooms on Capitol Hill. You have a Republican House and a Democratic Senate, because it's the current Congress. I don't care what happened in the election. You have a president who's just won re-election, and he is feeling empowered to do what he thinks is right. And he has specifically said as recently as 2 days ago, I will never, ever again extend those tax cuts for the affluent. It's not going to happen. Or you have a lame duck president who can do whatever he thinks is right without any consequence whatsoever. What are the odds after the campaign in those 3 weeks? Everybody in Washington links arms, sings Kumbaya, and extends the Bush tax cuts. I'd say pretty low. It can happen, but it's pretty low. That means the Republicans have a difficult decision to make. Either they capitulate to the president and say, fine, we'll allow taxes to go up on the affluent if you just keep them low for the middle class and the lower classes. Or the Republicans say, forget it, we're not going to pass any legislation, and they watch taxes go up across the board. Either way, your affluent clients are looking at higher taxes next year. Now, there is a silver lining. If the Bush cuts expire, that brings in $3.6 trillion of additional revenue to the federal government. You add that to the $2.1 trillion in spending cuts last year, and you've pushed the deficit issue off for a few more years. But what a horrible way to do it. Even the president, even the most ardent Democrat, says you need $2.50 to $3 of spending cuts for every $1 of tax increases. This is going to give us $3 of tax increases for every $2 of spending cuts, and that does not bode well for next year. And that's not even the end of the story. That expiration of the Bush cuts doesn't even include the additional 3.8% tax on investment income that begins next year. You add the expiration of the Bush cuts to the new tax under health care reform, and next year you're looking at a top tax rate going from 35% to close to 44%, a capital gains rate going from 15% to almost 24%, and a dividend tax rate going from 15% to almost 44%. You're also looking at a change in the estate tax. Right now, any American can give away up to $5 million without gift or estate tax. If not extended next year, that goes back to a $1 million exemption. Now, all of this happens if nothing happens. Congress doesn't have to pass a single piece of legislation. That is our tax system come next year. Okay, that is the happy Washington news. Now let's bring it down to your clients. How can you invest clients and make decisions this year to take advantage or at least blunt the consequences of what is likely to happen in Washington?